Welcome to the Intercept Live. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Thank you so much for joining us for this ongoing conversation. There is a lot happening in the news. It's almost difficult for us to get a good grip on where we should begin when you consider all of the late-breaking news that has occurred every day this week so far. On Monday, the Washington Post revealed classified information that Donald Trump, revealed classified information to Russian Ambassador Kislyak and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. That was trumped, no pun intended, on Tuesday by the New York Times as they revealed that Donald Trump, the existence of memos from former director of the FBI, James Comey, that suggested that Donald Trump wanted Comey to stop investigating Michael Flynn. And that was also trumped on today by the announcement from the Department of Justice into a special investigator, Robert Mueller, taking over the investigation into Russian ties in this election. There's so much happening. And to top it off, it's just beginning. But today we want to start with actually some good news. I'm very excited about the conversation that we're able to bring to you today about some good news in the sea of all of the disturbing news. I'm joined by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and co-founder of The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald, to discuss the release, finally the release of Chelsea Manning. Glenn, thanks so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So we've seen some tweets from Chelsea. We've seen that she is finally free. I just want to start with you. Tell me, what are you thinking? What are you feeling about this? I had a chance to read your article, and we'll dig into that a little bit. But first, I just want to get a sense from you because you know her. Tell us about what you think.
So I'm trying to focus on the positive, of which there is a great deal. I think a lot of us who have been working on her case for a long time and who have gotten to know her really well actually had a hard time envisioning the day that she would be released. Mm-hmm. She was originally sentenced to 35 years in prison. It was hard to imagine how that would be significantly shortened. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little bit surreal to see her tweeting photos of her no longer in a military prison, which is where she's been for the last 7 years, basically all of her 20s. Since she's 22, she's now 29. Mm. And I'm also extremely excited about the potential that I think her release can really have for the world. I mean, she's an incredible person. She really is, not just because of what she did, but because of who she is. She's incredibly engaging and compassionate and intelligent. Mm-hmm. And she's a unique person. And so I think that when you combine, the admiration that exists for her with her own personal attributes, the good that she can do for so many people is really unlimited. It's just I'm having a hard time completely, and maybe it's just my nature, getting over my anger and resentment over the fact that she has been in prison for the last 7 years and treated to horrific abuse for no good reason whatsoever. Right. She had a very difficult transition, which is inherently difficult for people, but made so much more so by her circumstances and the cruelty and malice which she confronted that is going to take a while for her to overcome. Yeah. So, it's definitely mixed feelings, but overall, I think you have to just be happy for her to see her walking free.
Yeah, and to that point, I saw the tweets of her first steps out of the prison and her first slice of pizza. I mean, before we even get into the politics of it, the implications about the future, just the sheer joy of seeing her free and experiencing and expressing herself in this manner, I think that's a story in and of itself, especially considering you alluded to it, the almost torture that she went through while in custody, while in prison, almost to the point of taking her own life. And not only just that side of the equation, but the casual dismissal that so many people and disdain that so many people still have for her, despite her clear contributions to America and the world at large. What do you think in that regards?
Right. I mean, that's part of what accounts for my mixed feelings. And I remember about 6 or 8 weeks ago, maybe a little longer, being truly horrified when I was speaking both to her and then also to her lawyer about what her plans were upon her release. And they kind of reminded me that there were all these immediate concerns that had to be resolved before she could even start thinking about that, including security concerns. I mean, she's a polarizing figure. Being released into a world where there's an epidemic of violence against trans women, never mind trans women who leaked thousands and thousands of top secret documents to WikiLeaks and was called a traitor by Donald Trump and all sorts of other terrible names by the most powerful people in the country. She, is living life for the first time as a woman outside of prison, which presents all of its own challenges. She doesn't know how the world is going to react to her. So, if you confine yourself to a certain circle, it really is true that there's a huge number of people in the world who regard her as a hero and who love and admire and respect her and have great gratitude for what she did. But there are a lot of people who feel the opposite. There's a lot of ugly bigotry toward her. There's, and I remember in particular, it was very difficult politically to generate any support for her because you had, on the one hand, conservatives who just naturally hate leakers going back to Daniel Ellsberg and the Nixon administration.
Right.
They regard Bush administration, they regard leakers as traitors and having committed treason. But then because Chelsea Manning leaked documents during the Obama administration and was imprisoned by the Obama administration and abused by them, you had lots and lots of Democrats, probably the majority, also spewing scorn for her and refusing to be sympathetic to her case or defend what she did in a way that they obviously would have had she leaked during a Republican presidency. And so both sides of the partisan aisle were pretty entrenched in their hostility toward her, and it took a lot of work to just even bring attention to her case, let alone generate support for her. And so I think now that Obama is the one who commuted her sentence, that has softened Democrats somewhat to the argument that she at least merits leniency, if not overt support. But I still think it's a difficult case outside a small kind of political faction to really make her feel comfortable in walking around her own country. And that's it's infuriating that that's a challenge, but it is.
Yeah, you bring up something important there, Glenn, and we're actually having a little bit of difficulty with your microphone. We can hear you. I don't know if you can adjust it a little, but you bring up something important there. The fact that it was President Obama's administration who tried her. She was in prison during his administration, and now he was the president to commute her sentence. This places a lot of, I have to refer to them as partisan hacks, in a difficult position because their knee-jerk reaction was to defend President Obama's decision, even in the face of this clear example of the administration trying to make an example of someone. So now their national inclination was to defend President Obama to the detriment of Chelsea, and now they find themselves in quite the problematic position rather, because he was the one to commute the sentence. Where do we go in terms of this side of the equation? People who, if this had happened underneath Bush, they would be celebrating Chelsea. If this happened underneath Trump, they would be celebrating Chelsea. But instead, we find ourselves having to fight tooth and nail just to get a modicum of respect for the human rights violations that she suffered. Where do we go in terms of the partisan considerations, and how does that impact Chelsea's next steps?
It's just sort of the torment of being, a craven partisan hack, as you said. I mean, that's part of the difficulty is sometimes the leader that you revere and who you mindlessly follow and support sometimes does one thing and then does an opposite thing after that, and you get put in the position of having to basically take completely antithetical positions in order to stay in accord with the leader whom you've decided to follow for partisan reasons. I think probably the best or the worst test case, and I feel like we talked about her on your last show, so let's make an effort, if that's true, not to on the next one.
Okay.
Is Joanne Reid, who was actually one of the leaders back in 2010, 2011 in mocking and scorning Chelsea Manning, and in particular the concerns about the abusive treatment, which, as you've alluded to, a UN investigation actually found, a formal UN investigation by the top UN torture official found was cruel and inhumane and bordered on torture and violated international norms. She was mocking the hell out of it. Joanne Reid was, saying things like, "Oh, give Chelsea Manning her blankie and pillow," and, attacking me because I was the one who actually broke the story originally about the conditions in which she was being held.
Right.
And just in general, defending the idea that she was getting what she deserved. I remember at one point, Joanne Reid said, prison is meant to be unpleasant.
Wow.
As justification for what this UN body ultimately found was borderline torture. And now, of course, President Obama has turned around and was the one who commuted her and commuted her sentence. And so that puts Joanne Reid in a really difficult position. Like, she can't anymore attack Chelsea because it's now a right-wing position to attack Chelsea. That's what Donald Trump is doing, attacking Obama for having released her.
Right.
But she can't quite, even someone like Joanne Reid can't quite do a 180 reversal and start praising Chelsea Manning. So on Twitter, I noted today there was a video about Chelsea Manning's release, and all Joanne Reid said was in this very passive-aggressive way, meanwhile, ... with a link to the video, because she had nothing else to say, because, she's not someone who can form honest opinions, and she got put into this really terrible dilemma. So I do think, like I said, you see Democrats being a little bit more open to the prospect that, okay, well, even if we think that she broke the law, maybe this punishment was too harsh. It was time to release her. I think Obama's commutation is what caused that. And so as sick as that makes me, because it's all motivated by mindless partisan, just emptiness, I guess I'll take it where I can get it.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, I don't think we talked about Joy on the last show, so we have at least one more chance to.
Oh, good. So then we have one more. Yeah, good.
I've talked about her plenty on my show for some of the same reasons, but we'll move along from Joy, and more importantly, let's discuss like what's next for Chelsea. I know that there's been a massive outpouring of support from certain segments. Have you had a chance to talk with her? I know she's just being released, so. It's probably very difficult to get up with her, but what are some of the next steps for her?
Well, one of the great things is, there was a public campaign to raise money for her that originally was targeted at $100,000, just essentially to give her some economic breathing room when she got released, because she has no job and no income. And it hit that $100,000 target. I forget how quickly, but very, very quickly.
Right.
And then they raised it to $150,000. I think it's now reached that or is about to reach that. So that's one good thing, is she has a little bit of buffer zone to just kind of breathe a little bit and figure out what she can do and what she wants to do and how she's adjusting. There's certainly no shortage of offers. She has tons of speaking engagements, paid speaking offers around the world. I know there are publishing houses interested in having her write a book. There's a documentary film, I believe, currently being filmed about her life after her release from prison. So there's no shortage of opportunities, but, I think when prison itself is psychologically traumatizing. Right. You add on to that the fact that she was basically disappeared because she was in the military and not a civilian tribunal, so she was cut off from the outside world. She didn't have many visitors. There were very few of us who were approved visitors or who could talk to her on the phone. And on top of all of that, she had to embark on her transition without a lot of support.
Right.
In a very, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, even if you have this network and infrastructure of support. Imagine being so isolated in the military brig in Kansas while you confront those challenges. So I think she has a lot of just kind of, processing to do, adjustment. But, she's also very politically engaged with a lot of opinions and a lot of causes that she believes in. And so I don't want to speak for her or speculate about what I think she will or won't do, but I would be surprised if she stays detached for very long. I think she's excited about, the life that she now has, that has been put into her hands. And I think she'll look to take advantage of her opportunities as quickly as possible. And I certainly hope she will.
Yeah. And in the midst of all of today's, I want to say today's, but in actuality is not only today, but this week, but the last 5 months, sea of madness. Chelsea's story definitely is a respite, a breath of fresh air. I want to get your input on some of the other stories happening today. Let's talk about the fact that the Department of Justice just moved to appoint a special counselor to investigate the Russia election ties. Robert Mueller, who was appointed underneath President Bush, he served for 12 years from September 2001 to September 2013. He hasn't been appointed as the independent investigator. What's your first take on that?
Well, I think it's a great development, actually, because I've always felt like what we need to get away from when it comes to all these questions surrounding Russia hacking and questions about collusion, what we need to get away from most are anonymous leaks and having the story shaped through agenda-driven intelligence operatives you can't see or analyze or touch or feel because they remain hidden in the shadows, which is where they, like cockroaches, like to thrive. I think we need to get away from speculation, from doubts about credibility. And up until now, you haven't had any kind of credible investigation. The House Intelligence Committee has been an utter mess. You have the Senate Intelligence Committee, which has been a little bit better, but it's controlled by the Republicans, and so no one really trusts it. And then you have the FBI under Jim Comey, who, for lots of different reasons, was suspect on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
And also just Comey's role in the election and all of his involvement with Trump made him also kind of questionable. And now you have this kind of classic, sort of elder statesman that commands respect in bipartisan Washington. I don't think I read a single bad word about Mueller today. Like, every one of these DC mavens are just joyous that he's now in charge. They feel like one of their kind, like an adult, a trustworthy, serious investigator is now put in charge of this investigation. Because he's a special counsel, he's more or less immune from interference. So I think finally our political culture, our political system will be able to do what it's not been able to do for months, and what it most needs to do, which is just kind of stabilize a little bit, like breathe a little bit, and not just rush around in this frenzied way from crisis to crisis, because I think it's actually been psychologically damaging in this collective way, like creating this exhaustion and this mania that's been really unhealthy to watch, and even to the extent that any of us watch it and are involved in it, to participate in. And so I think hopefully this will be kind of a calming energy, and it will convince people that they no longer need to rely on insane internet charlatans, to whisper to them about conspiracies and secret, processes that nobody else knows about.
Right.
There's going to be an actual real investigation that's done in a sober way by somebody who more or less everybody trusts, who will have subpoena power, and who can't really be impeded or interfered with, and eventually we'll find out what evidence does or does not exist on all of these questions about which everybody has been so madly speculating for so long.
Let's drill down there just a little bit, because you pointed out the madness around the anonymous leaks, and the narrative being set by so many anonymous leaks. Where do you draw the distinction, just for the audience's sake, the distinction between an anonymous leak and something along the lines of WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden? Because a lot of people, erroneously so, draw a comparison and they think that it's the same, but it's distinctly different from a journalistic perspective. What would you say the difference is?
The difference is so fundamental and so self-evident, although you're right, it, for whatever reason, eludes lots of people. In the case of WikiLeaks, in the case of Chelsea Manning, in the case of Edward Snowden, in the case of Daniel Ellsberg, what distinguished that reporting, what made it so consequential, was that you didn't have people making assertions or claims about things that happened. You had them showing you documents, showing you evidence that you could read through. So when we did our reporting at The Guardian, I didn't say someone at the NSA told me that the NSA is collecting metadata about everybody's communications every day. Had I done that, people would have rightly wondered whether it was true.
Right.
I was able to show the document that proved it was true. Same with WikiLeaks and the Manning releases, same with Daniel Ellsberg. It's all documentary, it's evidentiary. You can hold it in your hand and have it empirically proven. That's exactly the opposite of what most of these Trump stories are. For example, the Trump story that appeared this week in the New York Times that caused such a stir, that claims that Jim Comey wrote a memo saying that when he met with Trump in the White House, Trump said it would be great if we could end this Flynn investigation. This was from somebody who is anonymous.
Right.
The reporter, none of the reporters have seen the memo.
Right.
They don't know what the context is. They don't know anything. They don't even know if the memo actually says that. it could be really significant. It could be Trump ordering Comey to not investigate Flynn any longer, or it could be kind of an off-the-cuff remark like, hey, it'd be really great if it turned out that Flynn was innocent and this went nowhere, or it could be lots of things in between, but because we don't know who's saying it or what the basis is and can't touch the memo that we're all hearing about, all we can do is speculate and make assumptions. And that's true for every one of these stories about Trump leaking classified information to the Russians inside the Oval Office, like what did he say and why is it dangerous? On and on and on and on. Intelligence agents are shaping our discourse through highly agenda-driven leaks that are unaccompanied by evidence or documents and therefore cannot be reasonably evaluated or rationally assessed. And that is been what has been bothering me most, is that there are a lot of people in D.C. looking to put a knife in Donald Trump's back because they don't think he was the right person to have won the election. And that's not a good reason to reverse the election result or decide that we want to remove him. In order to do that, we have to have evidence of actual wrongdoing, and we're starting to get some of that, a little bit, I guess, but we certainly don't have anything like it yet. We just have anonymous leaks that can't be assessed because they're not of the kind of leaks that WikiLeaks produces or Chelsea Manning produced or Snowden or Ellsberg produced, because those are based on documents.
And to be sure, you're not saying that that these stories, you're not making a judgment call on the stories, you're making a judgment call on the fact that we really can't make a judgment call without seeing this information. So you're not saying these stories are untrue, you're saying without evidence, we have to take it with a grain of salt. As a journalist, I mean, that's pretty standard.
Yeah, it's just a journalistic matter. It's just basic skepticism. Of course. Exactly. I'm not saying that it's false that Trump obstructed the investigation or tried to obstruct the investigation. I'm not saying it's false that Trump leaked highly sensitive information unjustly to the Russians or that he colluded with the Russian government in hacking John Podesta. I'm just saying until there's evidence to demonstrate the truth of those claims, we shouldn't believe them or disbelieve them. We should want evidence before we take action based on them, including forming judgments on them.
Absolutely. We have a comment from Facebook regarding the special investigator from Thomas. He said, is the special...
Delete it.
Thomas wants to know from Facebook, is the special prosecutor a double-edged sword as far as what information will be released to the public? Are we more likely or less likely to get this information public with a special prosecutor?
We're probably much more likely. Remember that, the sort of classic case of a special prosecutor was Kenneth Starr, who investigated the Lewinsky scandal, if you want to call it that. And most of that information ended up being public. In fact, almost all of it in a very highly detailed, notoriously kind of a vulgar report. Now, most of that was not in the national security context. It didn't involve classified information. So perhaps there will be some information, I'm certain there will be, that is discovered by the special counsel. But once a special counsel is appointed, the idea is that it's not just a legal matter or a criminal matter, but a highly political matter. That's why the Justice Department can no longer be trusted to carry out the investigation, and why you have to bring someone from the outside in who has independence. And so once you accept that assumption, that premise, then of course everybody understands that you can't just decree at the end, yes, there was wrongdoing and no, there wasn't. People want to see what the findings were. That's the purpose of that. I mean, ultimately, the real purpose of the special counsel is not so much legal, but political. It's to assure the public that all the information is going to be assembled and then constructed and analyzed and ultimately disclosed in a reliable and trustworthy manner. Do you think if this leads to an impeachment of Donald Trump, right? Let's just follow that, because that seems to be the goal on one side of the equation. Do you think that would give us the respite that we need and a sense of calm and stability? And then what do you think about that illusion of stability and calm in the presence of the new president, Mike Pence? Yeah, I think those are very difficult questions to answer that we're not spending enough time examining at all. I live here in Brazil, and for 2015 and 2016, there was a major political crisis in this country that ultimately resulted in the impeachment of the democratically elected president, Dilma Rousseff. And no one really thought that she had committed any serious crimes. She's now out of office, and she hasn't been prosecuted or arrested or charged. Basically, what everyone ultimately acknowledged was that the elites of Brazil concluded that she was just a very poor manager of the country, that she was probably tangentially related to some corruption, and that because her approval ratings were so low, they could get away with removing her because even her own voters, for the most part, had abandoned her. And the idea was, well, we should do this because right now we have a crisis, a political crisis, an economic crisis, and we need to just become stabilized. We need to replace her with a more conventional, competent manager who will normalize our country and at least let us move on. And even though it's not an ideal thing to do, it'll be positive. And what ultimately ended up happening is people realized that it was illegitimate. The person they replaced her with is infinitely more corrupt than she is. There's been no stability at all. There's been increasing instability. He's literally at single digits in approval ratings, the new president, Michel Temer. And just today, there was a recording released, or a report of a recording released, where he's caught on tape approving bribes. So he's probably going to have to resign or himself be removed. It doesn't work. If you think that you're going to, create stability by removing the democratically elected president without a really compelling reason, like a genuine crime having been committed, I think it's delusional. And then I think the bigger question is, that I think is really weirdly being ignored, is, imagine you have all these angry people who elected Donald Trump because they wanted to send a very kind of disruptive and vindictive message to the political order, which they, for lots of good reasons and some not so good reasons, feel very hostile toward. Imagine if you were to say to them now, we know you voted for him, we know he won, but we're now going to remove him, say less than a year after he's been inaugurated, under circumstances that you regard as completely unjust, as lawless and violative of the Constitution, and more or less just a coup, a reversal of the vote that you cast. Is that going to create instability? Are those voters going to acquiesce to that meekly and say, okay, I guess there's nothing we can do? Or are they going to take their guns, which most of them have, and go out into the street and express their anger in that manner? I don't. And then I guess there's a subsidiary question, which is, should that matter? Like, is that a relevant factor in deciding whether Trump should be impeached? I don't think we know the answer to those questions, but I think those are pretty serious questions that deserve a lot more attention than they're getting.
We have one more question that I definitely want to get you to weigh in on from Facebook, and it's tied back to Chelsea Manning. Buddy Hansen from Facebook says, for individuals like Chelsea who are in a position of intel, what channel or procedure is available to them from government or the military concerning whistleblowing? In other words, do government employees have formal options within their established agencies specifically for disclosing important information to the public?
In theory they do, but in reality they don't. We had this question all the time in the Snowden context. Snowden discovered that there was a system of mass surveillance that had been erected. And for the most part, the scandal was not that it was illegal. The scandal was that it was more or less legal, that the U.S. government had found a way to do it legally. It's just that the public didn't know about it. So imagine if he had gone to his supervisors or to Congress, like Dianne Feinstein, and said, I want you to know I have these documents that show that the system of mass surveillance had been erected. They would have said, no kidding, asshole, and picked up the phone and called the FBI and reported him, which is what they've done a lot to a lot of whistleblowers. Whistleblowers come forward about secret programs, and then they end up having law enforcement stuck on them. So, imagine if you're Chelsea Manning in the middle of Iraq and you discover what all of her supervisors already well knew, which is that the U.S. military was indiscriminately killing civilians. They were detaining Iraqis, not for crimes, but for political dissent. They were enabling corrupt factions, all the things she saw that they already knew of. And she went to her supervisor in the military and said, oh, I'm very concerned about this. They would have, probably busted her down to a lower rank and maybe discharged her and put her in a court-martial. So in theory, people do have whistleblowing protections, but in practice, when it comes to things that everybody in government knows about and has decided they're okay with, but the public doesn't know, your only real alternative to have any kind of meaningful whistleblowing is to go to media outlets that will ensure that this information gets to the public and a debate can actually be triggered, as both Snowden and Manning were able to do.
Yeah, and the Intercept, if I'm not mistaken, the Intercept now has an outlet, a method with which people can contact them with whistleblowing information. Do you have any information on that handy?
Yeah, I mean, as a matter of fact, this was one of the principal objectives, one of our core missions when we formed the Intercept, was to provide avenues for sources to contact us safely. In a world where there's mass surveillance, where the government tracks everyone who's talking to everybody else, how can you safely have freedom of the press where sources are worried about being discovered by the government because there's ubiquitous surveillance? Mm-hmm. So we created lots of different channels where sources could safely contact us, including what's called something called Secure Drop, mm-hmm. which is a way that a source can anonymously send us documents or other information where we don't even know the identity of that source. And even if the government tells us we're required to turn it over, technologically, we just can't access it. Mm-hmm. We were one of the few at the time that had Secure Drop. I think now many dozens of media outlets around the world are using it in the age of Trump. We have other communication devices like Signal that we encourage sources to use. We publish online guides for how sources can safely communicate with us without being detected. So yeah, that has been a really high priority of the Intercept for a long time.
Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, co-founder of the Intercept. Thanks so much for joining me, man. I always appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We want to get you to weigh in on the discussion. You can leave a comment in the comment section. If you want to leave a voicemail, you can always do so at 857-600-0518. Just one thing that jumps out the most to me about the special prosecutor that's coming, Robert Mueller, is the fact that this could lead to an impeachment if the story about the memos from Comey are true and they pan out, and the Republican Party decides that it's no longer in their best interest to defend Donald Trump, but it's actually in their best interest to proceed with impeachment. We really could be saddled with a President Mike Pence. We need to ask ourselves the question if that's the road that we want to go down. Now, if Donald Trump has done something illegal, it's really out of our hands. It's no longer a political question in the sense of political discourse, but it becomes a political question in terms of the House of Representatives. Will they actually proceed with impeachment? However, I find it extremely sobering to think that we could have a President Mike Pence who, after these last 5 months of madness, I think that we can all agree that if nothing else, the last few months, the first few months of Donald Trump's presidency have been pure madness. We will be so relieved to have a moment of respite where we are no longer chasing every single controversy that pops up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We would be lulled to sleep by the calming demeanor of a religious zealot and an efficient religious zealot. I'm afraid of a Mike Pence, of a President Mike Pence, because if we give him time, imagine what Mike Pence can do with 100 days and a calming demeanor at the end of a chaotic 5 months. Imagine what he could do with majorities in the House and the Senate. And so I think we should be careful what we wish for in this campaign, this crusade to impeach Donald Trump. And again, I want to make it clear, Donald Trump, if he's guilty of something illegal, or if this does turn out to be obstruction of justice, the cookie is going to crumble the way it's going to crumble, and there's really not much that we can do about it. But we have to be ready to fight Mike Pence and his religious agenda. It does not get better after Donald Trump. It only gets calmer. And sometimes it's the calm before the storm that is the most dangerous. It's the eye of the storm where you think it's calm, but it's actually the most dangerous. And that's potentially what we're facing with President Mike Pence. I remember an article, actually it was an ad in the Boston Globe that was comparing Donald Trump to, at the time, Ted Cruz, who everyone felt Ted Cruz was the religious zealot. And it was a full-page ad in the Boston Globe, and it said a Donald Trump presidency would be disastrous, but a Ted Cruz presidency would be apocalyptic. And in many ways, I feel the same way about a Mike Pence presidency. There's nothing standing between Mike Pence signing an executive order for quote-unquote religious liberties that does nothing more than codify discrimination against the LGBTQ community. that would be one of the first things that he does. There would be nothing stopping him from going all out to defund Planned Parenthood with the majorities in the House and in the Senate. And then there would be nothing to stop him there would be nothing to stop the same tax agenda, the same corporate agenda that Donald Trump is getting ready to sign off on. I am not sure. I'm not ready to say, and I really want your opinion on this. Leave your comments and your feedback in this comment section. I'm not sure I'm ready to say that Mike Pence would be worse or better than Donald Trump, but I am definitely willing to say that we need to slow down and think about the ramifications of what happens after this ostensible victory of impeaching Donald Trump. And again, we may not have much say in it because it seems as though the die is cast and we're moving in this direction, particularly with the news and the evidence from, or the news rather, not yet evidence, but the news from the New York Times about these memos suggesting that he attempted to persuade former FBI Director James Comey into making the Michael Flynn investigation go away. Let's shift gears. I want to talk about another story coming out of, well, the story has a video to it. And there's a video that was shared by Sean King of the New York Daily News showing a police officer tasing not only an unarmed black man, but a black man who was already in cuffs. I want the video to speak for itself. Let's watch the video.
You might get up on me. Oh! No, pull away. You understand?
All right.
Pull away. You understand?
Don't pull away.
Don't pull away. You get it? Do you get it?
Yes, sir.
Are you going to straighten up?
Yes, sir.
Because I ain't playing with you today. Do you understand? Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
That's good.
Now we're going to get up.
And if you saw the video, there's a full 2 minutes of the video. You can go into Twitter or anywhere and find the full-length video. But you will see that this man is already in handcuffs. And it seems, without any provocation, for no reason whatsoever, the police officer involved used his taser and tased him repeatedly into submission, but he was already in handcuffs. According to Sean King on Twitter, he said the officer in question name is Sergeant James Young, and he is the primary officer, training officer for the officer who killed Jordan Edwards. We reported about 2 weeks ago on the murder of Jordan Edwards. In this case, in the case of Jordan Edwards, charges have been filed. However, in the case of Sergeant James Young, this happened in April of 2016. And the local officials, the department officials, said in a statement on Tuesday that outside agencies have reviewed the video and the decision was made not to file criminal charges. And so they were able to look at this video of a man in handcuffs, already in custody, already following instructions, being tased with no threat to any of the officers around. He's not a threat to himself. He was acquiescing to the demands of the police officers, and officials looked at this video and said, nothing to see here, no charges will be filed. Now, this happened last April 2016. The only reason this video got out to us was because it was leaked. It was leaked to a local news station, KDFW TV, a Fox News affiliate, and that's the only reason it became public. And the only reason it gained attention and traction is because people like Sean King, with the reach that's necessary to expose these atrocities, was able to share it. But even in the midst of us being aware of it, there's nothing that's going to be done about it. And you have to ask yourself the question, at what point will we actually find justice in the United States of America, when justice seems to be whatever America can justify? So long as justice is whatever America can justify, they will be able to look at videos like this when the average American can see how ridiculous this is. They will look at this and say, no charges are necessary. I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. I'm not sure what to do with this. I'm not sure what to do with this. I don't know. Maybe you could give me some advice. I'm not sure what to do with this, because at what point are we going to be able to look at, what's the point? Somebody tell me, what is the point of having body cams and having dash cams when people can look at the same exact imagery and videos and see the same thing that we see and dismiss it as nothing? Nothing warranting an investigation, nothing warranting an arrest, no charges, no suspension, nothing of any significance. And we would not have even known about it without someone leaking this out. If you can't understand the frustration of marginalized communities, I am not sure what is going to help you to identify with us. I'm not sure what you have to see, but this is an ongoing issue. It hasn't stopped. It seems as though it has been escalating, but in reality, it may have just been revealed by the ubiquitous presence of cell phones and social media. These types of things have always gone on. We've been talking about it over and over and over again. And after a while, you get tired of talking about it because you can't remember the names anymore. That's what I find myself running into every single episode that I do. I find myself not able to remember all of the hashtags, all of the names, all of the victims of people who have been brutalized or murdered by our American policing agencies. And in too many cases, we simply move along and say there's nothing to see here. There will be no charges. And justice has been served. Justice has not been served so long as justice is defined as whatever they can get away with. 857-600-0518 if you want to weigh in on the discussion, if you want to leave any comments in our comments section. I want to know what you think. At what point are we simply seeing different things? And did I see something in that video that they didn't see? Did I miss a sudden movement that would elicit this type of response? But more importantly, to the systemic problem, the fact that this has been here and that it seems like it's not going anywhere. And it's almost as frequent as we get breaking news with regards to Donald Trump. We get breaking news with regards to someone being brutalized or murdered by people who have been charged to protect and serve. But that's just me. I could be. Even more disturbing, in my opinion, because of the scope and the reach, is this announcement from Milwaukee County Sheriff David A. Clarke that he will be leaving office, his position as sheriff, to join and accept the federal appointment as an assistant secretary to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. He said in an interview on the Vicki McKenna's radio show, he said, I'm looking forward to joining that team. And he announced this on today on WISN AM 1130 in Milwaukee. So he, according to Sheriff Clarke, he will work in the department's Office of Partnership and Engagement as a liaison with state and local tribal law enforcement and governments. Now, just in case you may not know who Sheriff Clarke is, I have a couple of clips here that I want you to see just so that you can get a small inclination into his thinking.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, there is no police brutality in America. We ended that back in the 60s. So I don't know where they're coming from. You look at the data and the research, and there's a new Harvard study out that shows that there is no racism in the hearts of police officers. They go about their daily duty, if you will, to keep communities safe. The President of the United States knows better. He's playing the race game. He's playing race politics. Shame on him. He's been very divisive for this country. He has been a nightmare, and I cannot wait until January of 2017 so that America's nightmare can be over.
And this is just a small sample. There are plenty of videos to give you insight into the character of Sheriff Clarke. But even more alarming are the incidents of death inside of his county jails. There have been 4 cases where individuals have dehydrated inside of his jails. And this is the person who, without the need of Senate confirmation, Donald Trump feels is appropriate to appoint to this position. The irony of this is the response, however, from the Department of Homeland Security. You can see that on your screen. They said in a tweet this afternoon that senior positions are announced when made by official by the secretary. No such announcements with regard to the Office of Public Engagement has been made. And so it may be a case of Sheriff Clarke jumping the gun. If you've had any experience with his political commentary, any experience with his speech, if you've read anything about him, we can only hope that him jumping the gun would undermine him getting this position because he is a zealot by every definition of the word. And it would put people in a very dangerous situation to have an ideologue of this caliber serving in the Department of Homeland Security. There are enough investigations happening around him to suggest that he's not qualified for this position. However, this is where we are. This is where we are, where news that should be headline news that should be at the top of the hour, has been moved down to the end of the hour because of the incessant madness that we experience in this Donald Trump administration. Glenn alluded to it. We're tired. We are absolutely tired. I think commentators, journalists, politicians, people working. I mean, think about the people who are working in these positions. Everybody has to be experiencing a level of fatigue that they did not expect when Donald Trump took the oath of office on January 20th. But here we are. Here we are with so many stories that we cannot even keep up with them. Breaking news. Every day at 5 o'clock this week, we have had major breaking news. And it seems as though we simply cannot keep up. But the reality of it is that we absolutely must keep up, and we cannot get too tired to continue fighting, because even if they do impeach Donald Trump, we have to fight against Mike Pence. And I know people are saying, well, we can get rid of Mike Pence. I'm not holding on to that. We have to be ready to fight this agenda, this onslaught that is coming, not only just from the Republican Party, but from the institutions and the establishment that made Donald Trump possible. We cannot get weary in this fight, and we must realize that even though this is just beginning, and even though we are all fatigued, we have to remember that if we lay down our fight at this point, then the Republican Party and those who have corporate interests, bipartisan corporate interests, will be able to move with their agenda in a way that we will not be able to stop if we're not ready to fight every single step of the way. There's so much more that we could talk about. I hope to have the chance to talk with you about it in the future. But because of the nature of the news cycle today, if you are as fatigued as I am, I think this is as good a place as any to say good night, and we'll see you next time.